Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. Happy Wednesday to you. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We're looking at the 70 weeks of Daniel, chapter 9. I am explaining and sharing my view that there is a 37 to 40 year interim period between Pentecost. I think in one video I actually said Passover. Apologize for that. Just a slip. Anyway, from Pentecost until Rosh Hashanah, the judgment. And I've shared with you how the concept of the feast days underlies Daniel chapter 9. There are no less than 4 references, allusions, echoes, if you please, of the festal calendar right there in Daniel chapter 9. And I've shared with you, I think, I shared these concepts with a friend of mine in Israel who is considered one of the top Hebrew scholars in the world. And he said this was absolutely fascinating. He shared it with several top rabbis in Jerusalem, and he said every one of them were, quote, intrigued and believed that this was a quote, exciting concept. Now, that doesn't prove it, but it at least shows that there is some degree of validity to the idea when men who knew the history, knew the culture, knew the practices better than anyone else, when they see it, they say, this is exciting. Okay. I've shared with you in the last video, in yesterday's video, how the atonement was not completed in 34-35 AD. Jesus most assuredly had died on the cross. He died to put away sin, no question about it. But folks, he had to enter into the most holy place. And he didn't do that at the cross. He ascended to the Father. And by the way, the very imagery of Acts chapter 1 and entrance or the ascension, pardon me, is suggestive of the high priest entering the most holy place. Several commentators have taken note of that. So, from the cross until the ascension is 50 days or 40 days. So we have a 40-day interim from the death for the atonement until entrance into the most holy place. And then we have a 40-year gap from his ascension to the parousia, to the judgment. Now, let me illustrate. Oh, by the way, I've got to point this out. It was absolutely 100% necessary for the high priest to come out of the holy place and the most holy place on the festal occasions, on the feast days, in order to give the blessings of the sacrifices. In Leviticus chapter 9, verse 22, we are told that the people were not blessed. The blessings of the sacrifices were not given until the high priest came out of the tabernacle. Now, if that was true for all of the sacrifices, for all of the feast days, how much more would it have been true of the greatest day in Israel's history, the singular day of the atonement, the singular day in which, along with Rosh Hashanah, the books and the judgment took place. So you see, when it is argued that the atonement was completed in 34-35 AD, before Jesus ever came out of the most holy place for salvation. Now, if he was going to come for salvation, what does that mean? It means that salvation was not complete until he would come. They could speak of it as certain, proleptically, because they had the charismatic gifts of the Holy Spirit to guarantee it, but it had not yet become a full reality. There are not two totally separate salvations here. There's not an atonement back here. There's not an atonement there. There's not a salvation here. There's not a salvation there. It is one salvation. It is one hope, as Paul expressed in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 4 and 5. And that would not come until the parousia. So, if the atonement is to bring salvation, okay? If the atonement is to bring salvation, and Christ coming for salvation was yet future, then that is unequivocal proof. Guess what? The atonement would not be completed until Christ's second appearing. You can't have it completed before it's completed. When would it be completed? At His second appearing. Now, once again, let me drive this home, because you just really have to catch the power of it. If the atonement was for salvation, and who in the world would deny that? And 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement. Okay? So if 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement, then 70 weeks were determined to bring in salvation. It's just that simple. But Christ appearing to consummate the atonement, which was initiated by His death on the cross, which was continued by His ascension into the most holy place, Christ's second appearing for salvation, the salvation purchased through the atonement sacrifice, was yet future when Hebrews was written. Therefore, the consummation of the atonement and the completion of the 70 weeks, along with naturally Sukkot, that was coming. But the point of fact is, you cannot divorce the atonement of Hebrews 9 from the atonement of Daniel chapter 9. You cannot create two atonement sacrifices. You cannot create two soteriological atonements. 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement. The atonement is for salvation. Therefore, 70 weeks were determined to bring salvation. Christ would appear for salvation. Still future from Hebrews chapter 9. That means that the making of the atonement within the 70 weeks was yet future when Hebrews 9 was written. And that means that the interim between Pentecost and the last 3 feast days is fully established. The writer of Daniel, and God did not say, well, 70 weeks are determined to determine when the atonement would be made. No, 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. This cannot be overemphasized. All right? 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. The atonement is for salvation. Therefore, 70 weeks are determined to bring salvation. Christ, who had offered Himself to make the atonement, would appear the second time to bring salvation in the future from the writer of Hebrews. Therefore, the 70th week of Daniel, chapter 9, was not yet completed when Hebrews was written. I hate to be repetitious, but we must catch the power of that. I fail to see how that argument can be refuted in any way whatsoever. Okay, hey, get a copy of my book. 70 weeks are determined for the resurrection. Now, in tomorrow's video, I'm going to be sharing with you about how the atonement is depicted as fulfilled in Revelation. Okay? Thus, once again, establishing that the 70 weeks did not end in 34-35 AD. They ended at the time of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, bringing in Shemini Atzerat, about which we'll have much to say. Okay, I will see you on the flip side.